Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had someone invade your thoughts so deeply, so completely, that it's almost impossible to shake them off? No matter what you do, where you go, they're always there, lingering in the back of your mind. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And here's the thing, it's not by accident. There's a reason, there's a power, a force, something deeper at play that your mind simply cannot let go of. Maybe it's love, maybe it's pain, maybe it's a connection that's unspoken or unresolved. But whatever it is, you can't ignore it. So why is it that they have such a hold on you? You know the feeling, right? That moment when your mind is flooded with thoughts of someone, and no matter how hard you try to push them aside, they just keep coming back. It's not like you're sitting there intentionally trying to think about them, but somehow they invade your thoughts without permission. And it's not just once or twice. It's persistent. Maybe it's the sound of their voice, the way they smiled at you, or a memory that refuses to fade. You find yourself replaying conversations, analyzing moments, and before you know it, hours have passed. And you're still stuck in that thought loop. What's happening here? Why does this person have such a pull on you, even when you're not actively thinking about them? The answer lies deep within the way your brain processes emotions, memories, and connections. It's not by coincidence that this person keeps occupying your thoughts. There's something about them, whether it's the chemistry, the emotional bond, or even an unresolved feeling that has created a powerful imprint on your mind. And it's not something that can be easily erased. It's this internal pull that brings us to the core of the issue, why you can't stop thinking about them. The answer isn't just about attraction or desire. It's rooted in human nature and, more specifically, in the way our minds cling to things that leave an emotional impact. Whether that impact is positive or negative, it doesn't matter. Your mind will hold on to what resonates, what stirs up strong feelings, and what feels significant to your emotional state. And for some reason, this person has found a way to leave their mark on you in a way you can't ignore. So if you've ever found yourself unable to shake thoughts of someone, it's not your fault. It's the way your brain is wired. Your mind doesn't forget easily. And when someone leaves an imprint on you, they tend to stay there, echoing through your thoughts no matter how hard you try to move on. This is where the power of human connection comes into play, and the reason you can't seem to let go of the thought of them. It's more than just a passing fancy. It's something deeper that you can't escape, no matter how hard you try. There's something undeniably magnetic about the way certain people make us feel. It's not always easy to explain, but you can sense it when you're around them. Whether it's the way they speak, the energy they radiate, or just the presence they command in a room, there's something about them that draws you in. And this magnetic pull doesn't just affect how you feel in the moment, it lingers, leaving an imprint long after you've parted ways. You find yourself thinking about them, replaying interactions, and even wondering why it's so hard to move on. Now think about the last time you were in the presence of someone who had this kind of effect on you. Did they have a certain energy that made you feel alive, inspired, or maybe even challenged? The truth is, this magnetic quality is far more than just a surface level attraction. It's rooted in deeper psychological and emotional factors. When someone has this kind of impact on you, it's often because they touch something profound within you. They tap into your desires, your vulnerabilities, or even your dreams in a way that feels personal, almost as if they see something in you that you can't fully see in yourself. This pull can be intense and consuming because it creates a sense of connection that feels both electric and undeniable. The energy they project resonates with something inside of you, whether it's a longing for intimacy, understanding, or simply the feeling of being seen. And when this happens, your brain starts to fixate on them, chasing that same energy, that same connection. It's like being drawn into a current that's difficult to resist. What makes this pull even more powerful is that it's not one-sided. The person on the other end of that magnetic connection is often unaware of just how deeply they're affecting you. This makes the experience even more perplexing, because you may find yourself completely captivated by someone who doesn't even know the effect they're having on you. But that doesn't change the fact that their energy is like a beacon to your mind, pulling your thoughts and emotions in their direction. And while this magnetic force can feel exhilarating and even addictive, it's also important to recognize the complexity of this connection. It's not just about the person themselves, it's about how they make you feel, how they awaken parts of you that were lying dormant, how they give you a sense of purpose, or maybe even challenge you to grow in ways you hadn't expected. This energy isn't always positive either. Sometimes it can create tension, frustration, or even confusion as your mind struggles to understand why they have such a hold on you. In the end, this magnetic pull is a reminder of how deeply interconnected we all are. Whether it's through shared energy, mutual respect, or an unspoken bond, certain people enter our lives and leave an impact that resonates far beyond the moment. And that's why you can't stop thinking about them. It's the power of their presence, the force of their energy, and the way they've managed to touch something in you that you can't easily forget. Our minds are extraordinary, built to remember and process vast amounts of information every day. But have you ever stopped to consider how and why your brain fixates on certain people? It's not random. Our brains are designed to hold on to things that make an impact, things that stir us emotionally, mentally, or even physically. It's the only reason we're able to remember and hold on to the past as deeply and directly as we do. When you meet someone who evokes a strong response, whether it's joy, pain, admiration, or frustration, your brain sees that as important and stores it in a place that makes it hard to forget. It's not just about liking or disliking someone. It's about the emotional weight they bring into your life, which your mind automatically registers as significant. When we're talking about thoughts that linger, it's often because our brain is trying to make sense of something that's unresolved or especially impactful. Think about a moment where you've felt deeply moved by someone. Maybe it was the first time you met them, a conversation that opened up new perspectives, or an experience you shared that felt profound. These moments are etched into your mind. They stand out among the everyday noise of your life, creating lasting memories. And our brains are wired to replay these experiences, to revisit the people who were part of them, because they carry emotional weight. Your brain wants to understand them better, process them, and figure out what role they play in the bigger picture of your life. This is why we find it so difficult to move on from people who have made a strong emotional impression. Your brain doesn't want to let go of something that has been emotionally significant. It holds on to it because it believes that understanding or resolving these feelings will help you grow or find closure. Whether we want to admit it or not, a lot of what we experience and remember revolves around emotional attachment. Our brains aren't just passive recorders. They're active processors, constantly trying to make sense of the emotions and experiences we encounter. And the people who have left a strong imprint are often the ones that occupy your thoughts, because your brain is trying to analyze and categorize them in ways that make sense of your emotional experience with them. This tendency to hold on to these thoughts isn't a sign of weakness or obsession. It's simply your brain's natural way of prioritizing the important stuff. When we feel something deeply, especially in relationships, whether positive or negative, our minds treat it like a signal. This matters. That's why you can't stop thinking about them. Your brain is trying to figure out what this person means to you, how they fit into your life, and why they're so hard to forget. It's an internal process that, while sometimes frustrating, is also a sign that your mind is doing its job, processing emotional information to help you better understand your feelings and your life. So sometimes we all go through, and as powerful as this process is, it can also be overwhelming. Sometimes your brain fixates on a person or memory because it's trying to work through emotions you haven't fully processed. Maybe there's a question that hasn't been answered, a feeling left unresolved, or an experience that hasn't been fully understood. The mind will keep returning to these people because they represent something unresolved within you, something your brain is trying to solve. Something your brain is trying to solve. So when you can't stop thinking about them, it's a signal from your brain that you're working through something significant, something that requires your attention and emotional energy. If you're unable to identify the cause of your fears, when you start looking into the reasons why you can't stop thinking about someone, you quickly discover that it's not just about emotions or memories. It's also about the science behind it. Your brain, that incredible organ, is constantly processing information, firing neurons, and releasing chemicals in response to everything that happens around you. And the more intense the experience or emotion, the stronger the neural connections that are formed. This includes the people who leave a deep impact on your life. When someone makes an impression on you, whether through a meaningful connection, a powerful conversation, or an unforgettable moment, your brain's reward system kicks into action. This system, which includes a complex network of chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, makes you feel good and reinforces the connection you have to that person. Dopamine, for instance, is often called the feel-good neurotransmitter. It's the chemical that floods your brain when you experience something pleasurable. Whether it's eating your favorite food, receiving a compliment, or spending time with someone who makes you feel special. When you're around this person, your brain releases dopamine, creating a feeling of happiness, excitement, and satisfaction. This chemical reinforcement is powerful, which is why you'll find yourself craving more of that person's presence. Your brain wants to experience those good feelings over and over again. And because the experience of being with them made you feel so good, your brain holds on to that memory, replaying it to try to recreate those feelings. But it's not just dopamine at play here. Oxytocin, often referred to as the love hormone, is also involved in the way we bond with others. This chemical is released when we experience moments of trust, closeness, and intimacy, when we form connections with people. If you've ever spent a lot of time with someone, shared deep conversations, or had meaningful physical contact, oxytocin likely played a big role in that experience. And once it's released, oxytocin strengthens your attachment to that person. This is why you can't stop thinking about them. Your brain is chemically wired to remember the feelings of closeness and connection they created. The stronger the bond, the more powerful the brain's response, and the more your mind holds on to them. Serotonin, another key chemical, also contributes to these feelings of attachment. It's the neurotransmitter that stabilizes mood and gives us a sense of well-being. When you feel good about someone or a relationship, serotonin is often in play, creating a sense of calm and contentment. The problem arises when your brain becomes accustomed to this chemical feedback loop. And if you're continually thinking about a person who gives you these feelings, your brain starts to expect that source of serotonin to maintain emotional balance. This can lead to a situation where you can't break the cycle. Your mind keeps returning to that person because it's trying to fulfill a need for emotional regulation and stability. This process can become even more intense if there's any uncertainty or longing involved. If you don't know how someone feels about you, or if there's unresolved tension or potential, your brain will keep replaying those moments with them to try and resolve the conflict. This is where the brain's tendency to fixate on someone truly kicks into high gear. It's as if your brain is trying to solve an unsolved equation. repeatedly attempting to figure out why you can't shake them off. The question is how much or what you need. The emotions and chemicals involved, along with the uncertainty, create a loop where your thoughts constantly return to that person, driven by your brain's natural desire for closure or clarity. So when you can't stop thinking about them, it's not just a random occurrence. It's your brain's way of processing powerful emotions, strengthening bonds, and trying to fulfill its need for emotional stability. This chemical response, while a natural part of human connection, also means that breaking free from these thought patterns can be difficult. It's like your brain is on a loop, constantly replaying the feelings that person gave you and try to make sense of why they hold such a strong position in your mind. Human beings are inherently social creatures. From the moment we are born, we are wired for connection. Our need for social bonds and attachments is not just a luxury, it's fundamental to our survival. Throughout our evolutionary history, forming strong connections with others was essential for protection, cooperation, and emotional well-being. But even today, in our modern world, this need for connection still plays a crucial role in our lives. And when someone enters our lives who deeply affects us, either positively or negatively, it can trigger a strong psychological response. This connection, this attachment, is the driving force behind why we can't stop thinking about certain people or following certain programs or trying certain things, because this connection and attachment is the driving force behind why we can't stop thinking about certain people. The concept of attachment is central to understanding why someone might occupy your thoughts. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby, suggests that the bonds we form in early childhood influence how we relate to others throughout our lives. These early attachments shape our emotional responses, our perceptions of love, and our ability to trust. When we form a strong emotional bond with someone, we activate the same neural pathways that were formed during childhood attachment to caregivers. This attachment provides a sense of safety, security, and emotional fulfillment. It's why we feel so connected to certain individuals, because that bond triggers the same emotional responses that are rooted deeply in our childhood experiences. But attachment isn't limited to just romantic or familial relationships. It extends to friendships, professional connections, and even acquaintances who somehow manage to impact us in profound ways. When you meet someone with whom you form a deep emotional bond, whether through shared experiences, vulnerability, or mutual understanding, that connection becomes something your brain holds on to. It's as if your brain recognizes that this person has become part of your emotional landscape, and it wants to ensure that bond is not forgotten or left unresolved. Your mind continues to return to them because it sees them as part of your support system, your emotional security net. This attachment process can be incredibly powerful, and it doesn't always have to be positive. Sometimes we can become attached to people who challenge us, frustrate us, or even cause us pain. These types of attachments are often referred to as negative or disorganized attachments. Even though these relationships might not be healthy or fulfilling, our brains still hold on to them because they represent something unresolved, something that needs closure or resolution. This could be a feeling of abandonment, betrayal, or unfulfilled desire. And even though the connection may not be fulfilling in a positive way, your brain still fixates on that person because it's trying to resolve those feelings, seeking a way to make sense of the emotional turmoil caused by the attachment. When you can't stop thinking about someone, it's often because the attachment you formed with them is strong enough to make your mind repeatedly revisit that person. If the connection is positive, your brain seeks to keep the bond alive, constantly reminding you of the good feelings they evoke. But if the attachment is negative, your mind may revisit them because it's trying to make sense of the pain, the confusion, or the unresolved feelings that came from that relationship. Either way, The attachment remains at the forefront of your mind because your brain perceives it as something important that needs to be understood or processed. This attachment dynamic also explains why some people linger in your thoughts long after they've left your life. A person with whom you formed a deep emotional bond can leave a lasting imprint on your psyche. Even if they've moved on, even if you've tried to move on, the attachment remains, tugging at your thoughts and emotions. Your brain doesn't easily forget the bonds you form because it associates those bonds with emotional significance. When you associate those bonds with emotional significance, and until you fully process or resolve the attachment, your mind will continue to return to them, trying to make sense of the connection that still holds so much weight in your emotional world. So, the question everybody should be asking themselves is, how did this trauma, when we invest emotionally in someone, we're not just opening ourselves up to the potential of a relationship, we're also committing a part of ourselves to that connection. Emotional investment means you're putting your energy, time, and feelings into another person, which naturally creates a bond that is not easily broken. Whether it's a romantic relationship, a deep friendship, or even a professional connection, emotional investment carries weight because it makes you vulnerable. When you invest in someone emotionally, you begin to see them not just as another individual, but as a part of your life, your story, and your sense of self. If you're not making progress, the only thing that will change that is for you to characterize the relationship. This investment can take many forms: shared experiences, deep conversations, acts of kindness, and even unspoken support. Each interaction adds a layer to the emotional bond you're creating, and the more you invest, the stronger the connection becomes. Over time, this bond forms a deep emotional attachment, and when that person becomes a significant part of your life, it becomes increasingly difficult to stop thinking about them. Your brain registers the emotional investment as significant and continues to process it, holding on to the person because they become intertwined with your thoughts, feelings, and even your identity. Emotional investment is also a form of trust. When you invest emotionally, you trust that the person will reciprocate or appreciate the vulnerability you're offering. This mutual trust is what strengthens the emotional bond and makes you feel more connected. When that trust is honored, it reinforces the attachment you feel toward that person, which is why it becomes so difficult to let go once they have made such an impact on you. The more emotionally invested you become, the more your thoughts return to them, because you're trying to make sense of the feelings and experiences that have been created through this trust. But what happens when this investment is not reciprocated, or when the relationship is disrupted? Emotional investment becomes even more intense, and your thoughts may revolve around them even more. You may replay conversations or moments in an attempt to understand what went wrong or why the connection changed. This process of mentally revisiting the relationship is your brain's way of trying to reconcile the emotional investment with the reality of the situation. It's almost like your brain is trying to resolve the cognitive dissonance between what you expected from the connection and what actually transpired. This is why it can be so hard to stop thinking about someone when the emotional investment isn't fully returned or when the relationship ends unexpectedly. Even in the absence of clear answers, emotional investment causes you to continue thinking about the person because your brain is still trying to process the bond that was formed. Emotional investment leaves traces that are hard to erase. It creates a sense of attachment that doesn't just fade away overnight. Whether the relationship is still ongoing or it has ended, your mind holds on to the feelings and memories because they've become part of your emotional landscape. You've given a piece of yourself to that person, and now your mind is trying to understand the role they played in your life, which is why they continue to occupy your thoughts. Because your body's telling you, I'm still alive. It's just that when you came into my life, I became a frag at times. Emotional investment can lead to an obsession of sorts. where you can't help but revisit the relationship over and over in your mind. It's as if you're trying to resolve something, seeking closure or understanding. This mental loop happens because your brain feels as though it hasn't fully processed the emotional energy you've put into the connection. The feelings of attachment, longing, or even regret may persist because the investment you made in that person has not been fully understood and your mind seeks resolution. And this is why even when we try to move forward, we often find ourselves unable to stop thinking about someone. They're not just someone who passed through our lives. They're someone to whom we gave a part of ourselves. And that emotional investment leaves an imprint that can be hard to forget. There is a subtle but powerful force at play when you can't stop thinking about someone, and it's rooted in the emotional impact they've had on your life. Every relationship, whether brief or long-term, leaves an imprint on you. And the deeper the connection, the stronger that imprint becomes. But sometimes the reason you can't stop thinking about someone is because of the deep emotional residue they leave behind, often connected to something unresolved or unspoken. These unresolved feelings are like loose ends that your mind can't help but revisit, trying to find closure or clarity. Think about the moments you share with that person, those times when something significant was said, or maybe when things were left unsaid. These lingering emotions or unsatisfied needs are often the primary reason why you find yourself replaying certain interactions over and over again. Your mind is trying to make sense of what happened, trying to find meaning in the moments where things didn't quite add up or weren't fully resolved. Even if you tell yourself you're moving on, your subconscious keeps returning to these unresolved moments, trying to finish the narrative your mind has created around that person. This is particularly true when emotions like frustration, disappointment, or longing are involved. When your mind experiences a conflict between what you expected or wanted from someone and what you actually received, it can create a mental loop. You might find yourself asking questions like, why didn't they respond the way I thought they would? What did I do wrong? Could things have been different if I had said or done something else? What did I do wrong using that person mentally? What did I do wrong being lazy? What did I do wrong hurting his feelings? These unanswered questions become a source of mental distraction, pulling your thoughts back to them as you try to find an answer or resolution. Your brain doesn't like ambiguity. It wants to find closure, to understand, and to fill in the gaps. Sometimes the emotional impact of unresolved feelings isn't always negative. It can also stem from the idea of what could have been, when there's an unfulfilled sense of potential in a relationship, whether it's a friendship that never developed further or a romantic interest that never materialized. Your mind keeps returning to the possibility of what might have been. These what-ifs can be just as consuming as unresolved conflict. The mind plays out scenarios, imagining alternate outcomes, wondering how different things could have been if only certain choices were made. This can create an ongoing mental loop where you can't help but think about the person, your interactions with them, and how things might have turned out differently. It's okay to be changed up a little bit. Another factor contributing to this mental fixation is the concept of emotional vulnerability. When you open yourself up to someone, you let them into parts of you that are often hidden from the world. You allow yourself to be vulnerable, to share your thoughts, fears, and desires. If that vulnerability was met with neglect, indifference, or even rejection, the emotional wounds can leave a deep mark. It's these wounds that are often revisited in your mind as you try to make sense of how your emotional openness was received. The emotional scars left behind by that vulnerability can keep you thinking about them because your mind is still processing the impact of that openness, whether it was embraced or dismissed. In relationships, we also experience emotional resonance, where certain people resonate with our deeper emotional needs, even if the connection was fleeting. When you meet someone who mirrors your emotional needs, values, or aspirations, it's easy to get attached because you feel understood in a way you might not have felt before. But when that resonance is disrupted, whether because of distance, misunderstanding, or other factors, it creates a sense of loss. The loss of that connection, even if brief, can cause you to continuously think about the person because you're grieving not just the person themselves, but the part of yourself that they mirrored or awakened. You may not even realize it, but your brain keeps returning to them because that connection represents something that was lost, and your mind wants to understand what happened. The pull of unresolved emotional attachments is one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. It's not about being obsessive or weak. It's simply that your brain is trying to work through the emotional material that was left unresolved. You can't stop thinking about them because your mind hasn't fully processed the emotions tied to the connection. Whether it's because of a lack of closure, lingering feelings of regret, or the desire to know how things might have turned out differently, those unresolved emotions keep you mentally tethered to that person. Your mind continues to revisit them in an attempt to reach a place of emotional resolution, a place where you can let go, move on, and no longer be haunted by the unanswered questions or unfulfilled emotional needs.